My ex-husband told me I'd never survive without him when he left me for another woman. When my dad won $12 million, he came crawling back, and I let him crawl. My ex-husband Dennis left me on a Tuesday in March, 3 weeks after our 5th anniversary. He didn't sit me down. He came home from work, put a duffel bag on the bed, and told me he'd been seeing a woman named Christy from his gym for 7 months, and that he was moving in with her. I asked if we could talk. He said there was nothing to talk about. Then he said the thing that stayed with me longer than the marriage itself. He said I should be realistic about my options because without his income, I wouldn't last 6 months. He said it while zipping up his bag, not even looking at me, like he was giving me a weather update. Then he walked out, got in his truck, and drove to Christy's apartment 14 minutes away. I know it was 14 minutes because he'd been making that drive for 7 months while I was home cooking his dinner. The divorce was fast. We rented our apartment, he took the car. I had a part-time job at a veterinary clinic making $11 an hour, and he knew that, which is exactly why he said what he said. He wanted me to panic. He wanted me to call him crying and beg him to come back. I didn't. I moved into my father's spare bedroom on Polk Street and started working full-time at the clinic. It was tight. It was hard. But I'd rather share a bathroom with my 71-year-old father than spend one more second depending on a man who thought I was a charity case he could walk away from. That was March. My father won the sweepstakes in October. $12 million. He'd been entering those things for 30 years. My mother used to tease him before she passed. Said he'd spent more on stamps than he'd ever win back. But the man hit. He called me from his living room, hands shaking through the phone. My father is not flashy. He paid off his house, set up a trust, and gave me $2 million because he said I'd earned it by being the only person who showed up after mom died. I put a down payment on a real house, 3 bedrooms, 15 minutes from my dad. I bought a car. I enrolled in a vet tech program I'd been wanting to do for years. For the first time in my adult life, I could breathe without doing math first. Dennis found out in November. On a Saturday morning, 7 months after he'd walked out for a woman he met on a leg press machine, he showed up at my father's house with flowers. Not my house, my father's. He told my dad he'd made a terrible mistake. My father, who had never liked Dennis but tolerated him because I asked him to, told Dennis I didn't live there anymore and shut the door. Dennis found my new address somehow, probably through his cousin who works at the post office. He showed up the following Wednesday with a bigger bouquet. He said he'd been miserable. He said Christy meant nothing. He said he wanted to come home. I asked when they broke up. He said 2 weeks ago. I did the math. He found out about the money in early November. He and Christy broke up in early November. He showed up at my dad's house a week later. The timeline wasn't complicated. I told him to leave. He came back the next weekend with a pawn shop ring. He said we could travel, buy a bigger house, start the family we'd talked about. Every plan cost money. My father's money. He hadn't mentioned love once. I asked him if I should be realistic about my options. He didn't get it. He just kept talking. I told him to get out and not come back. I shut the door and watched until his truck pulled away. I thought that was the end of it. But Dennis didn't take no for an answer. He changed tactics. 2 days later, Tony called me, a guy Dennis and I had both been friends with during the marriage. Tony said Dennis had been crying on the phone, telling people I'd come into money and turned cold. I'm not taking sides, Tony said. I just wanted you to know he's telling people you shut him out. Dennis wasn't just trying to get back into my life. He was building a story where he was the sorry man trying to fix his mistakes and I was the woman who got rich and forgot where she came from. I called my dad. Damon told me Dennis had pulled his truck up to the curb the day before and sat there for 20 minutes on his phone, pointing at the house. Over the next week, I started getting calls and texts from people I hadn't heard from in months. Dennis's cousin, a woman from my old apartment building who'd barely spoken to me when I lived there, a guy from Dennis's job. Every one of them worked the same question in. Are you and Dennis really done? I heard you came into some money. Dennis was sending scouts. I called him directly. Stop sending people to check on me. I'm not a house you're trying to buy. He put on that confused, innocent voice he used to use when I'd catch him in a lie during our marriage. I don't know what you're talking about. People are just worried about you. I said, nobody was worried about me when I was making $11 an hour, Dennis. He went quiet, then real low. I'm not giving up on us. I hung up. I didn't slam the phone down. I didn't yell. I just pressed the red button and set my phone on the counter and stood there looking out the window at my yard, my house, my life that I had built with my own hands and my father's love. Dennis didn't get to claim any of it, but hanging up didn't make me feel better because I knew he meant it. He wasn't going to stop. This wasn't a man who missed his wife. This was a man who saw money walking away from him and couldn't stand it. I called Tony back the next day and sat him down over coffee. I told him the real timeline. How Dennis left in March. How my dad won in October. How Dennis and Christy broke up the same week he found out about the $12 million. How he showed up at my dad's house first because he thought my dad would be the easier way in. How every plan Dennis pitched involved spending money. How he never once, not once, said he missed me as a person. Tony sat there with his hands around his coffee cup and didn't interrupt. When I finished, he looked at me for a long moment. I believe you. All of it. The timeline doesn't lie. But you need to know he's telling a different story to everyone else. He's saying you changed, that the money made you cold, and some people are buying it. That hit me hard. Dennis didn't just want my money. He wanted my reputation. He wanted to take the way people saw me and twist it until I looked small and cold and ungrateful, so that the only way to fix it would be to take him back. And if I didn't take him back, then at least he got to walk away looking like the good guy who tried. Either way, Dennis won. That was his game. That's when I called Savannah. She used to date one of Dennis's friends, so she'd been around him for a while. When I told her what was happening, she didn't even sound surprised. He did the same thing to his ex before you. Showed up at her family's Thanksgiving, made a whole speech. Her family pressured her into taking him back. It lasted 4 months. I asked what happened after 4 months. He cheated again. He doesn't want you. He wants an audience. That word stuck. Audience. That's exactly what Dennis had been building. Not a relationship. An audience. People who would watch him perform the role of the sorry husband, the changed man, the guy who just wants another chance. He needed witnesses so that when he told his version of the story, there were people nodding along. I spent the next 3 days going through my phone like it was evidence, because that's exactly what it was. Every text Dennis had sent since he started showing up again. The one about buying a bigger house together. The one mentioning a vacation to some resort he'd clearly been looking up online. The one where he brought up investing together, whatever that meant. The voicemails about fixing up my house, adding a pool, looking at properties, starting a business with startup money he clearly expected to to come from my account. I scrolled through all of it, slow, reading carefully, and I noticed something that made my chest tight. Not once, not in a single text, not in a single voicemail did Dennis say he missed my laugh. He never said he missed talking to me at night. He never said he missed the way I made coffee. He never said he missed me. Every message was about what we could have together, and every single thing he described cost money. That told me everything I needed to know. My dad's birthday dinner was coming up. Dennis had already called Damon asking if he could come. Damon told me, I don't want that man in my house, but if he shows up anyway, I want you to be ready. I asked Damon to invite him. Why would I let that snake in? I said, because I want him in a room full of people who know the truth. Damon was quiet for a long moment. I could hear the clock on his wall ticking in the background, the same clock that's been there since I was a kid. Then, real quiet, almost like he was talking to himself, he said, your mother would have done the same thing. And I felt that in my bones. My mom never raised her voice, never made a scene, but when someone tried to play her, she made sure they played themselves. Damon agreed. He said if Dennis called back, he'd tell him to come. He even said he might enjoy it, and I believed him, because there was something in my father's voice I hadn't heard in a while. It wasn't anger, and it wasn't worry. It was the sound of a man who'd been patient for a very long time, and was finally ready to watch patience pay off. 2 days before the dinner, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number at first. Then I looked again. I'd seen that area code once before, months ago, when Dennis had left his phone on the counter and a text came through from a number he hadn't saved. Christy's number. I answered. The voice on the other end was shaky. I know you probably hate me, but I need to tell you something about Dennis. I said, I'm listening. She said, he didn't break up with me. I kicked him out. He was using my credit cards. He ran up $6,000 in 2 months, and when I confronted him, he said I was being controlling. That's when I went through his phone. $6,000. While he was living in her apartment, eating her food, sleeping in her bed. She kept going. She'd found texts on his phone between Dennis and his cousin, the same cousin who worked at the post office, the same one who'd given Dennis my new address. Texts from before they'd even broken up. He told his cousin, word for word, if I play this right, I'll never have to work again. That's when I threw his stuff on the lawn. I sat down on the edge of my bed. It wasn't anger, it was clarity. Pure, simple clarity. Dennis hadn't made a mistake and come crawling back. Dennis had run a calculation. He'd looked at the numbers, looked at me, looked at Christy, and picked the option with the most zeros. He did it while she was still making him dinner. I asked Christy why she was telling me this. She said, because he called me yesterday. He asked me to come to some dinner at your dad's house and pretend we're on good terms. He said if I backed him up, he'd pay me back the $6,000. I almost laughed. He asked you to lie for him at my father's birthday dinner? Yes, and I thought you should know. I said, Christy, would you be willing to come anyway and tell the truth instead? She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, he told me you were crazy. He said you were obsessed with him and that's why he left. But you don't sound crazy to me. You sound like someone who's been dealing with the same person I was. I closed my eyes. The same playbook. The same lines. Dennis told me Christy meant nothing. He told Christy I was crazy. He kept everyone in separate rooms with separate lies. She said yes. Not for Dennis. Not for me. For herself. I called Damon. One more guess, Dad. Who? The woman Dennis left me for. The silence lasted maybe 3 seconds, but I could feel him smiling through the phone. Then he said, this is going to be the best birthday I've ever had, because my dad had been waiting for this. Not in a mean way. In the way that a father waits when someone hurts his kid and gets away with it. Damon had watched Dennis walk out on me. He'd watched me show up at his house with a trash bag of clothes and red eyes. He'd given me his spare room and never once made me feel small for needing it. And then he'd watched Dennis come crawling back with his flowers and his fake apology and his pawn shop ring, sniffing around the money like a dog at the dinner table. Damon had been patient. But now, with the dinner days away and a woman named Christy willing to say it all out loud, Damon didn't have to be patient anymore. Neither did I. This was Damon Kozlov's 72nd birthday, and Dennis was the entertainment. The morning of the dinner, I got to my dad's house around 9. I had grocery bags in both arms and a box of balloons wedged under my chin. And when I kicked the door open with my foot, Damon was already sitting in his armchair with a cup of coffee like he'd been waiting for me. I told him happy birthday, and he just smiled and watched me unload everything onto the counter. Pot roast, the rolls from Mom's recipe card, a cake from the bakery he likes, a few balloons because Damon's not a streamers and confetti kind of person. I tied them to the back of his chair and set the table with the good plates my mom used to pull out for holidays. Nothing fancy, just warm, just right. While I was working on the food, Damon watched me move around his cooking area the way I used to watch my mom do the same thing when I was little. At one point he said, your mother always said the best gift you can give someone is the truth. I smiled. Then Dennis is about to give you one heck of a birthday present. Damon laughed. A real laugh, the kind that comes from deep in your chest. I hadn't heard him laugh like that in weeks. Tony showed up first with a bottle of wine and a card. He found me by the fridge. Dennis texted me an hour ago. He asked me what he should wear. He thinks this is his big moment. I leaned against the counter. It is, just not the way he thinks. Savannah arrived 20 minutes later through the back door. No knock, dish already in hand. She leaned close while we worked. Is Christy still coming? I nodded. You know he's going to lose it when he sees her. That's the point. He's been performing for months. Tonight he doesn't get a script. At 6:45, 15 minutes before Dennis was supposed to arrive, there was a quiet knock at the front door. Christy stood on the porch, arms crossed over her chest like she was cold. I opened the door. You don't have to do anything you don't want to. If you want to leave at any point, you leave. She nodded. I'm not leaving. I spent 4 months being lied to. I'm done being quiet. I walked her into the living room where Damon was sitting. Damon stood up, which he doesn't do for just anyone because his knees bother him, and shook her hand gentle, the way he shakes hands with people he respects. I'm sorry my former son-in-law put you through what he put you through. Her chin tightened. Thank you. Nobody said that to me before. I stood there and watched my 72-year-old father do in 10 seconds what Dennis couldn't do in 5 years of marriage. He made someone feel seen. We sat down around 7. Christy was directly across from one empty chair. Tony on my left. Savannah next to Damon. Isabel, an old friend of my dad's who was the one who first pushed me to go back to school when I was still in his spare room, at the far end. Isabel doesn't miss anything. She looked at the empty chair, then at me. So that's where the show happens? That's where the show ends. At 7:15 the doorbell rang. The whole table went quiet. Damon looked at me. I nodded. He let out a slow breath. Well, let's see if he brought flowers again. I walked to the front door. Through Through the frosted glass, I could see Dennis with a gift bag, and that practiced smile, the one he puts on when he wants people to think he's a good guy. I opened the door. Dennis walked in like he'd been invited personally by the president. He made a straight line to my dad and stuck out his hand, said something about how grateful he was, how good Damon looked, how nice the house smelled. Damon shook his hand but didn't smile. Dennis didn't notice. He was already turning to the table, compliments rolling off his tongue. His eyes moved across Tony, Savannah, Isabel, but he didn't look closely at the far side of the table where Christy sat with her back partially turned. He sat down in the empty chair across from her, still grinning. It's good to be back with family. I didn't say a word. I just sat down and waited. Dennis picked up his glass like he was at a wedding reception. He looked at my dad. I just want to say, sir, happy birthday. You've always been like a father to me. Like he hadn't spent 5 years calling Damon the old man behind his back. He waited for someone to clink. Nobody moved. Damon picked up his own glass, took a slow sip, set it back down. Dennis lowered his glass. The smile cracked, just a flicker, but he pivoted, the way Dennis always does. He folded his hands and looked around the room. I just want everyone here to know that I made a mistake leaving this woman, and I'm here to make it right. The words hung. Nobody responded. And then Christy turned around. I watched Dennis's face in real time. The smile didn't fall. It froze, like someone had hit pause on a remote. Christy looked right at him. Hey, Dennis. His head snapped toward me. What is she doing here? She's my guest. His jaw tightened. His hands went flat on the table. This isn't funny. Nobody's laughing. Sit down. His eyes were darting from face to face, doing the math. He looked at Tony. Tony didn't look up. He looked at Savannah. Savannah didn't blink. He looked at my dad. Damon took another sip. Christy leaned forward. Dennis, should I tell them, or do you want to? Something ugly flashed across his face. Tell them what? There's nothing to tell. Christy reached down beside her chair, pulled out her phone. Then I'll read the texts. The color in Dennis's face changed in 2 seconds. Christy didn't look at him. She looked at the phone, her voice steady even as her hand shook. This is a text from Dennis to his cousin, sent on November 3rd, while Dennis was still living in my apartment. Her dad just hit for 12 million. If I play this right, I'll never have to work again. She scrolled. I'll go back to her. She always wanted me to come back. This is easy money. Another. Christy's getting suspicious. I'll dump her once I'm back in. The table was dead silent. Dennis reached across the table toward Christy's phone. Tony was faster. He put his hand on Dennis's arm. Firm. Don't. Dennis pulled his arm back. Turned to me. Those are taken out of context. I looked at him. What context makes easy money romantic? Dennis had nothing. His mouth moved, but nothing came out. Then something broke loose. He shoved his chair back. You set me up. You all set me up. And that's when my dad spoke. Damon hadn't said a word since Dennis walked through the door. His voice was low and slow and steady. Son, nobody set you up. You set yourself up. Dennis turned. You walked out on my daughter and told her she wouldn't last 6 months. She lasted. You came back when you smelled money. And now you're sitting at my table on my birthday trying to sell everyone a story that a woman you used for 4 months just read the receipts on. Dennis opened his mouth. Damon held up one hand. I'm not finished. My wife used to say you can tell a man's character by what he does when nobody's watching. But you, Dennis, you show your character even when everyone's watching. And it's ugly. I felt those words in my chest. Not because they were mean, because they were true. And because hearing my dad bring my mom into it in a way that was so right and so honest made me feel like she was there at that table with us. Dennis looked like he'd been hit by something he couldn't see. His mouth was open and his shoulders had dropped and his eyes were wet. Not from sadness, from shame. Pure, raw, nowhere to hide shame. He looked around the table one last time. Tony was staring at his napkin. Savannah had her arms crossed. Isabel shook her head once, slow and final. Christy sat there with her phone still in her hand. My dad had already gone back to his drink like Dennis wasn't worth another word. Then he looked at me. I was the only one looking back. I stood up. You told me I should be realistic about my options. So here are yours. You can leave right now, and you never contact me, my father, or anyone at this table again. Or you can keep standing there, and Christy can tell everyone about the $6,000 you stole from her credit cards. Dennis's face went white. He turned to Christy. She held up her phone again. I've got the statements too. Dennis didn't say another word. He grabbed his gift bag, knocked his chair backward into the wall, and walked to the front door with his shoulders up by his ears. The screen door slammed. I heard his boots on the porch steps, his truck door, the engine, and then the sound getting smaller and smaller until it was gone. The table was quiet for about 5 seconds. Then my dad picked up his fork, looked at the cake in the middle of the table and said, "Best birthday I've ever had." And everyone laughed. Tony laughed. Savannah laughed. Isabel shook her head and smiled. Christy covered her mouth and laughed with tears in her eyes. And Damon just sat there at the head of his table, grinning like a man who'd just gotten exactly what he wanted for his birthday. I pulled my chair in and looked across at the empty seat where Dennis had been sitting 30 seconds ago. For the first time in a very long time, the chair across from me was empty, and I was glad.